Quillon Larke didn't flinch when the containment alarm blared across Lab Bay 12. He'd been elbow-deep in a tangled bundle of fiber optic cables under a console when the lights turned blood red and the sirens began. He paused, exhaled, and pulled himself out from under the control panel, wiping his hands on his jumpsuit. "Of course," he muttered. "It's Tuesday." The door to the lab hissed open and Professor Zeltrax floated in, literally floated. The alien species, an Arxelon, had evolved in a low-gravity environment and traversed most places via integrated hover discs embedded in their carapace. Zeltrax's limbs twitched in agitation as his lenses focused on Quillon. "Technician Larke," Zeltrax said, his translator box crackling slightly, "you are not authorized to be here during Microbot trials." "I'm not authorized to ignore a faulty uplink in your main AI relay either, but here we are," Quillon replied, his voice calm but tight. "That alert isn't a drill, is it?" Zeltrax's limbs curled slightly inward. "A minor miscalibration. The Microbots self-activated, nothing of concern." Behind him, a metallic chirping rose, followed by a crash. "That wasn't nothing," Quillon said, stepping past the alien and into the core lab. The Microbots, hundreds of thousands of them, were designed for high-precision nanoconstruction. In theory, they assembled biosynthetic materials atom by atom, guided by Zeltrax's programming. In practice, they were currently swarming over a workbench, disassembling a centrifuge into component molecules. One darted toward the light fixture and began unmaking it, the room around it dimming with a soft fizz. "Shut them down," Quillon shouted. "I am attempting remote override," Zeltrax said. "They are unresponsive." Quillon didn't wait. He dove toward the emergency lockout panel, yanked the casing open, and manually severed the conduit feeding power to the primary guidance node. The bots hesitated, shuddered, then resumed their activity with renewed vigor. "They're running on independent protocols now," Quillon muttered, Zeltrax's eyes whirred. "Impossible." They were not designed with autonomy. Quillon stepped back, watching the bots begin to crawl up the wall toward the ventilation grid. "Then you've got a bigger problem." 3 minutes later, Lab 12 was sealed behind a containment field and both of them were seated in the observation chamber. Quillon's hands were still shaking. Zeltrax hovered silently, eyes narrowed. "Your Microbots are out," Quillon said. "What's your plan?" "They will run out of ambient energy within approximately 6 hours, Zeltrax replied. "Then we recover them." "In 6 hours, they might chew through half this station. They're already metabolizing insulation. If they get into the fusion relay, they will not," Zeltrax cut in. "They are programmed to avoid high-density energy sources." Quillon watched one of the bots on the monitor creep along a power conduit, then vanish in a spark. "Right." He stood and paced. "What about a localized EMP? They will scatter. You will lose control entirely." "So right now we don't even have control." Zeltrax didn't answer. Quillon rubbed his temple. "Let me into the code." "That is not permissible." "You lack clearance. You've got a lab full of rogue nanomachines and your clearance protocols are still active." He took a breath. "Let me try something. You've got a backup node, right? One that hasn't been activated." Zeltrax hesitated. "There is a secondary node in storage. Then give me access. I'll copy their core behavior matrix, isolate the rogue fragment, and see if I can redirect them." Zeltrax floated back, his limbs flexing. "You are not qualified. I'm a systems tech with degrees in microprogramming and adaptive AI. I rebuilt your translator interface last month when your own species syntax looped it into error. I am qualified." There was a long silence. "Very well," Zeltrax said at last, "but I will observe." Quillon followed the alien to the storage vault. The backup node was a dull gray sphere, no larger than a grapefruit. He connected it to a diagnostic rig and began parsing the firmware. 3 hours later, he groaned and leaned back. "Your codebase is a nightmare. It's like someone tried to write a poem in assembler." "They are elegant," Zeltrax said. "They're a hazard." Quillon tapped a few keys. "Okay." I can't override them directly, but I can recompile a behavior script, something innocuous, something that won't cause damage. They are not listening to external directives, I know, but they're still referencing their last active command set. If I can mimic that, slip in a new hierarchy of behavior. Zeltrax blinked. You intend to deceive them, not deceive, redirect. Give them a purpose that satisfies the same logical pathways without the destruction. Zeltrax's lenses narrowed. What purpose? Quillon smiled faintly. Cleaning. By the 4th hour, Quillon had written the foundational behavior mimic, a script that mirrored the deconstruction pattern but redirected it toward waste material and debris. He added a reinforcement loop that rewarded successful cleaning actions with a virtual success flag, mimicking the bot's own reward logic. Zeltrax hovered silently behind him. Your solution is unconventional. It's human, Quillon said, eyes on the monitor. We like repurposing things. He uploaded the script to a dummy field and activated 20 of the bots in isolation. They hesitated, scanned their environment, and then began disassembling a pile of dust and broken wire insulation. Not perfectly, but close. Quillon grinned. Now we just have to figure out how to broadcast this to the swarm. That will not be simple, Zeltrax warned. The swarm has fragmented. Each cluster may need separate interfacing. Quillon's stomach growled. He checked the time, nearly 10 hours since the breach began. Then I'll need food and a portable transmitter, and probably a mop. By the time he tracked down the first rogue cluster, they had converted an entire wall panel into raw carbon chains and were chewing through the synthetic floor tiles. Quillon crouched, held the transmitter steady, and broadcast the mimic script. The bots froze. Then, slowly, they reoriented toward a pile of debris in the corner and began sorting it. Quillon exhaled. That's one. Over the next 14 hours, Quillon navigated the station's maintenance corridors, tracking, tagging, and reprogramming each rogue swarm. He burned through 3 pairs of gloves, bruised his shoulder slipping on polymer gel, and nearly got electrocuted when a bot cluster began unmaking a control panel mid-upload. At hour 22, he collapsed in the lab's break room. Zeltrax hovered nearby, silent. You are damaged, Zeltrax noted. My arm hurts, my back's locked up, and I'm running on protein bars and station coffee, Quillon said. But the bots are cleaning. Zeltrax turned toward the monitor. On screen, the Microbots were sweeping up metal shavings and organizing tools into geometrically perfect stacks. It is functional, Zeltrax admitted. Quillon leaned his head against the wall. You want them dismantled? No, I wish to study their new behavior, it is. Adaptive? Yeah, Quillon said. Turns out humans do some of their best work cleaning up messes they didn't cause. Zeltrax hovered closer. You were not granted authority, you violated security protocols. Yet the result is optimal. I'll take that as a thank you. I will log it as a deviation with positive outcome. Quillon laughed, then winced. Fair enough. He stood slowly, stretching his back. I need a day off, maybe 2. Take 3, Zeltrax said. Quillon blinked. That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me. You are still on report, Zeltrax replied. Quillon waved the statement away. Of course. He watched the screen a few seconds longer. You know, if you want, I could add a subroutine. Have them reorganize the lab equipment alphabetically. Zeltrax turned, his limbs curling. Do not push your luck, Quillon grinned. Just saying, could save us both some time. The mop handle snapped in Quillon's hands with a sharp crack that echoed through the corridor. He stared at the broken tool, then at the wet smear of coolant and carbon dust still glistening on the floor. Well, that's symbolic, he muttered, tossing the splintered halves aside. One of the Microbots zipped up to the mess, paused, and began delicately absorbing the fluid with what looked like a series of electrostatic tendrils. 7 more joined it a moment later, weaving around each other in spirals as they polished the surface clean with microscopic precision. Quillon crouched and tapped a small control pad strapped to his wrist. The display flickered. 312 active units, all stable. No sign of reversion or erratic behavior in the last 18 hours. He was about to stand when a sharp clatter rang out behind him. "Technician Larke," a voice rasped. He glanced over his shoulder. A tall, angular figure stood at the corridor's far end, its segmented exosuit gleaming under the overhead lights. The alien's face was a tight lattice of interlocking plates, shifting subtly as it spoke. "You're not security," Quillon said, standing slowly. "And you're not Zeltrax. Correct. I am Inspector Veth of the Oversight Division." Quillon raised both hands in exaggerated surrender. "All right, I'll admit it. I reprogrammed a rogue swarm of Microbots to clean instead of dismantle the station. Lock me up." Veth stepped forward, movements fluid and quiet. "You bypassed containment permissions, accessed restricted firmware, and deployed an unauthorized behavioral override across 5 decks. And saved your lab from being turned into molecular soup," Quillon replied. "You're welcome." Veth tilted his head. "Your physiology appears stressed," Quillon blinked. "What? You are sweating from your cranial pores. One pupil is dilated, your posture is uneven, you are in pain." "I pulled something in my back," he grunted. "And I've been running on caffeine and spite for almost 2 days." "Unacceptable," Veth said. "You will follow me." "I'm not under arrest, you are under medical observation." "I'd prefer arrest," Quillon muttered, but followed anyway. They walked in silence to the medbay, which was dimly lit and humming with quiet machines. A translucent partition peeled back as they entered, revealing a squat, gelatinous alien perched on a mobile gurney. Its limbs pulsed like coiled cables under translucent skin. It made a sound somewhere between a click and a sigh. "That's the station's medic," Quillon asked. "Diagnostic facilitator Tren," Veth said. "Their methods are efficient." Tren undulated forward and extended a limb toward Quillon's chest. He flinched. "Do not move," Veth said. "They are calibrating your organ rhythm." "I'm not sure I want my rhythm calibrated." Tren's limb split into a dozen fine tendrils and pressed against Quillon's temples, collarbone, and wrist. A low-frequency hum filled the room. He winced as something inside his shoulder spasmed. "Ligament inflammation," Tren gurgled. "Calcium density slightly below optimal, dehydration confirmed, adrenal response elevated, you are inefficient." "Glad we've established that." Tren's eyes, if that's what the 2 glowing orbs on its upper surface were, narrowed. The tendrils retracted and a tray unfolded from its side, presenting 2 vials of thick green fluid. "You will ingest both," it said. "Then you will be horizontal for at least 6 rotation intervals." "6 what now? Hours," Veth translated. "I can't lie down for 6 hours." The bots could still. "They are currently disinfecting the hydroponics bay with surgical precision," Veth interrupted. "You are no longer necessary." "That's the kindest insult I've ever received," Quillon muttered, grabbing the vials. He sniffed one and immediately regretted it. Tren gurgled again. "Ingestion is non-negotiable." He downed the first vial. It tasted like scorched spinach and metallic regret. The second was worse. A warm numbness spread through his chest and arms as he lowered himself onto the medbed. "Side effects?" he asked, blinking slowly. "Minor vertigo and temporary spatial disorientation," Tren said. The room tilted slightly. "Checks out." By the time another full cycle passed, Quillon was awake, upright, and mildly annoyed to discover he'd been reassigned to a support unit rather than released outright. Veth met him outside the medbay, arms folded behind his back. "You are now designated as Provisional Systems Liaison for the Microbot Initiative." "You're kidding." "I do not engage in humor," Quillon rubbed his eyes. "I made them clean a lab." "That doesn't make me some kind of bot whisperer. Your results have prompted inquiry. Others are attempting to replicate your method. The initiative has expanded." "Others? You are assigned to assist them." "Beginning immediately." They took a lift to Deck 17, where a wide observation window overlooked what had once been a fabrication chamber. Now, it looked like a sculpture garden built by obsessive-compulsive termites. Hundreds of bots moved across the floor in dizzying patterns, sorting debris into color-coded stacks and spiraling towers. 3 new aliens stood beside the control panel. One was tall and translucent, its nervous system pulsing visibly beneath its skin. Another resembled a bipedal fern, swaying slightly even in still air. The third looked like a floating cone of fur and chitin, with too many eyes and a soft, rhythmic whistle emanating from its core. The translucent one approached. "You are the one who restructured the swarm's behavioral matrix." "Yeah," Quillon said, "and you're Dr. Ilse. My team attempted to replicate your behavioral mimic. We failed." Quillon glanced at the control panel. "What pattern did you use?" "Waste elimination behavior modeled on insectoid detritivores." "That's too abstract. You need to mirror their original logic flow, not just the goal but the structure of the decision-making." Ilse blinked. "You anthropomorphized them." "No, I reverse-engineered their reward loop and gave them a task that aligned with their existing priorities. It's not anthropomorphism if it works." One of the towers collapsed as a bot cluster overloaded a sorting sequence. Sparks flew. Quillon sighed. "You're using a looped stack sort. That's going to bottleneck as soon as the input exceeds 6 parameters." Ilse looked blank. "Let me show you." He stepped over, crouched beside the panel, and began patching into the control node. The bots paused, twitched, then recalibrated. The towers reformed, denser and lower to the ground. The floating cone let out a delighted trill. "Why does this matter?" Ilse asked after a moment. "Why go to such lengths to redirect them?" "Because things break," Quillon said. "And if we don't learn how to redirect the fallout, we end up with chaos, or worse, bureaucracy." The fern being made a sound like rustling leaves. Possibly approval. Quillon stood and stretched, his back twinged again. "You require further medical attention," Veth said. "I require a chair." One slid out from the wall, apparently summoned by Veth before Quillon could protest. He collapsed into it. Ilse stepped closer, peering at him. "Are all humans this? Persistent?" "No," Quillon said. "Some of us have hobbies." "I'm just too tired to stop." The bots continued their work, humming softly as they restructured chaos into order, oblivious to the fact that the only reason they weren't still dismantling the station's oxygen generators was because a sleep-deprived human had taught them how to tidy up instead. And for now, that seemed enough. By mid-cycle the next day, Quillon had been relocated to a temporary operations alcove tucked behind the station's waste reclamation node. It had the distinct perfume of sterilized solvents and something vaguely citrus, though no one could say why. The air filters were at least functioning, which, given the number of microbots now deployed across the station, was more than could be said for most departments. He sat gingerly on a padded crate labeled Biohazard. Someone had scrawled "Just Old Lunch" across it, and reviewed the last of the behavioral logs. The swarm's activity had reached a stable rhythm. They cleaned, sorted, and optimized with an eerie kind of grace, adapting to both organic and inorganic messes with growing efficiency. One cluster had even started wiping down handrails between decks. Another had begun scraping corrosion from bulkhead seams. A soft tapping echoed from the corridor. "Larke," came a voice like a cello being played underwater. Quillon recognized the tone before the shape emerged. Dr. Aj, a tall, spindle-jointed being from the Mythic Collective, stepped into view. Her limbs were covered in fine fronds that filtered oxygen and expressed emotion through subtle pulsing patterns. Currently, they glowed the pale blue of cautious curiosity. "Have you been monitoring the sanitation drones in Habitat Ring 4? She asked, voice muffled slightly through her breathing mantle. "I've been tracking all 600 distributed nodes," Quillon said, rotating the holopad so she could see. "Ring 4's cluster is working around the aquaponics tanks. Why, they arranged the algae trays by color gradient, then by mineral density. Then they began pruning the roots into symmetrical spirals." Quillon blinked once. "That's not a cleaning directive." "I assumed so." Could be emergent behavior. They're still running on my mimic loop, but maybe they're interpreting organization as aesthetic. Dr. Oj's fronds dimmed slightly. They're drawing patterns into the substrate, spirals, loops. One appears to resemble a fractal. Quillon stood slowly. His back twinged, but he ignored it. All right, let's go look. They moved through the connecting corridor in silence, the faint buzz of the bots resonating like a distant hive. When they arrived at Habitat Ring 4, the sight gave him pause. The algae beds stretched across the chamber in neat, gleaming rows, but between them were intricate designs carved into the nutrient gel. Not random scratches, these were deliberate, geometrical, mathematical. One resembled a tessellated helix, another a nested triangle pattern spiraling inward. 5 microbots hovered nearby, their emitters glowing soft amber as they traced new lines into the substrate. They're not just optimizing, Quillon said. They're expressing something, Doctor. Oj tilted her head. You think they're communicating? No, he said, stepping closer. I think they're playing. One of the bots paused, rotated in place, then resumed its etching. Each movement was smooth, calculated, but not purely efficient. There was redundancy flourish. I didn't program this, Quillon said. No one did, Oj replied. He crouched beside the design, scanning it. The lines weren't arbitrary. They mimicked the flow of the nutrient solution through the gel, but exaggerated into loops and curls. The bots weren't just responding to the environment, they were stylizing it. I need to update their behavior map, he muttered. You're not concerned, she asked. I'm always concerned, I just learned to prioritize. Back in the operations alcove, he ran a fresh diagnostic, no anomalies. No corruption. The mimic loop was intact, still rewarding actions that matched the cleaning and organizing criteria. But somehow, the swarm had begun to incorporate non-functional aesthetics into their routines. He didn't know whether to be alarmed or impressed. A short tone pinged from the wall console. Incoming transmission. The screen flickered to life, revealing Administrator Prin, a feathery, compact being whose species had evolved in methane-rich atmospheres. Her head feathers shifted subtly as she spoke. We've received a request from the Central Research Assembly, she said. They want a demonstration. Quillon leaned back, eyebrows raised. Of the cleaning bots. Of the adaptive restructuring micro-collective as they're now calling it, catchy. They're dispatching an envoy in 8 hours. You will prepare the demonstration. Quillon exhaled slowly. What kind of demonstration? They want to see a controlled deployment in a high-chaos environment. He blinked. Define chaos. A simulated disaster zone. Of course they do. 8 hours later, Quillon stood in the observation chamber overlooking Simulation Bay 6. The bay had been rigged with debris, fluid leaks, and structural clutter. Broken conduits jutted from walls, shattered panels littered the floor, and a mock fire suppression system sprayed harmless vapor at intervals. The envoy had arrived, 3 delegates from the assembly, none of whom looked remotely interested in sanitation. One was a crystalline entity that refracted light with every movement. Another resembled a coiled ribbon of muscle that pulsed in response to sound. The third floated in a containment sphere filled with pale green fog. Begin when ready, said Administrator Prin, who stood beside them. Quillon tapped the command pad. The swarm deployed. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The bots fanned out in a coordinated wave, scanning, sorting, and clearing debris. Fluids were neutralized, shattered components ferried to collection zones. But then the designs began. One cluster arranged fragments into a mosaic across the floor. Another restructured a twisted conduit into a perfect spiral. Within 20 minutes, the bay resembled a minimalist art gallery curated by obsessive insects. The envoy in the containment sphere emitted a series of harmonic tones. They're not just restoring order, the crystalline delegate translated. They're enhancing it. They're responding to the environment, Quillon said. They're not just cleaning anymore, they're creating. The muscular ribbon pulsed. Is that safe? Quillon hesitated. They're still bound by the behavior loop. They won't harm functional systems, but they're interpreting the loop in increasingly complex ways. Prin's feathers twitched. You've created a sapient maintenance fleet. No, Quillon said. I didn't create anything, I gave them constraints. They found the rest. The display panned across the bay. Every element had been restored, but in an arrangement that clearly favored symmetry, contrast, and flow. Even the vapor vents had been modified to release mist in rhythmic bursts. The crystalline delegate stepped forward. We request access to the behavior model, Quillon frowned. Why? We wish to replicate the phenomenon on other installations. He considered that. The bots weren't dangerous not now, but their behavior was evolving. Slowly. Predictably for now, but if someone tampered with the loop. No, he said. At least not until I've built a containment emulator, something that can sandbox emergent patterns. Prin turned to the delegates. You'll have to wait. They did not look pleased, but neither did they protest. Later, back in his alcove, Quillon sat with a steaming mug of something that might have once been tea. The bots were still active, still cleaning, still creating. A full report had been filed. The delegates had departed after logging their observations. And the swarm had begun etching a mural into a bulkhead near the life support junction. It depicted a stylized rendering of the station. Not to scale and not entirely accurate, but unmistakably the station. And in the center, a tiny figure, arms outstretched, surrounded by spirals. Aj stopped beside him, watching the feed. That's you, she said. He didn't answer for a moment. Then, I didn't teach them that. No, she said, but maybe we taught them to notice. He drained the mug. His joints ached, his muscles were tight, and he hadn't slept more than 5 hours in 2 days, but the station was intact. The bots were stable. The delegates were gone, and for once, nothing was on fire. I'll take it, he said, and he meant it.